Welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to take a deep dive into the history of the American Cold War with the USSR. The origins of the Cold War can be traced back to the aftermath of World War II, when the Allies defeated Germany and Japan. The Allies, consisting of the US, UK, France, and the USSR, worked together to defeat their common enemy. But as soon as the war was over, they found themselves on opposing sides of a new conflict, the Cold War. The main difference between the US and the USSR was their ideologies. The US was a capitalist democracy, while the USSR was a communist state. This ideological divide created tension between the two nations, and each began to see the other as a threat to their way of life. As the Cold War continued, it began to spread beyond just the US and USSR. The two superpowers began to compete for influence around the world, trying to spread their respective ideologies and gain allies. In 1947, the US introduced the Marshall Plan, a program to provide economic aid to Western European countries in an effort to prevent the spread of communism. The USSR responded with the creation of the Warsaw Pact, a military alliance between communist countries in Eastern Europe. The Cold War was also played out in the realm of espionage, with both the US and USSR trying to gather intelligence on each other and other countries. This led to a number of high-profile spy cases, such as the capture and execution of Soviet spy Rudolf Abel in the US and the arrest of American U-2 spy plane pilot Francis Gary Powers in the USSR. The 1950s and 1960s saw some of the highest tensions of the Cold War. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, and the US and USSR found themselves on opposing sides of a hot conflict. The Korean War ended in a stalemate, but it was a clear indication of how quickly the Cold War could turn into a hot war. The late 1950s saw the USSR launch the first man-made satellite, Sputnik, into space. This event, along with the subsequent launch of Yuri Gagarin as the first man in space, sent shockwaves through the US and sparked a renewed sense of urgency to win the race to space. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The USSR had installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the US, and the US responded by blockading the island and placing its military on high alert. It took a tense standoff, but the USSR eventually agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for a US promise not to invade Cuba. The 1980s saw the beginning of the end of the Cold War. In 1981, Ronald Reagan became president of the US and took a hardline stance against the USSR. However, at the same time, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev began implementing reforms in the USSR, including openness, glasnost, and restructuring, perestroika. In 1989, the Berlin Wall, which had separated East and West Berlin since 1961, came down, marking the beginning of the end of the Soviet Empire. In 1991, the USSR officially dissolved and the Cold War was over. In 1991, the USSR officially dissolved, and the constituent republics became independent states. This was a difficult and chaotic time, as the Soviet Union had been a major global power for decades, and its sudden collapse was met with a mixture of shock and uncertainty. The transition to a new system was not easy, and the former Soviet republics faced many challenges as they tried to establish new governments, economies, and ways of life. Some of the former republics, such as Russia, struggled to find their place in the world as independent countries, while others, like the Baltic states, found success as they embraced democracy and free markets. For America, the end of the Cold War marked a time of great opportunity. As the only remaining superpower, the US was free to pursue its interests around the world without the constant threat of Soviet interference. The US was able to extend its influence and dominance, both economically and militarily, to become the dominant power in the world. However, this newfound power and influence also came with new challenges. The US found itself drawn into conflicts around the world, such as the Gulf War and the War on Terror, as it tried to maintain its global dominance. At the same time, the US faced economic challenges, such as globalization and rising income inequality, that threatened its position as the world's leading economic power. The end of the Cold War left a lasting legacy on the world. It marked the end of the rivalry between the US and USSR and paved the way for a new era of international cooperation and stability. The US and Russia, once bitter enemies, now work together on a variety of global issues, such as arms control and counterterrorism. At the same time, the end of the Cold War has had a profound impact on the global economy. The collapse of the Soviet Union led to a major shift in the balance of power, with the US and China emerging as the dominant economic powers. This has had far-reaching consequences as the world adjusts to this new balance of power and finds its place in a rapidly changing global economy. The end of the Cold War was a time of great change and transformation for both the USSR and America. It marked the end of a decades-long conflict and paved the way for a new era of cooperation and stability. The legacy of the Cold War is still felt today, as the world continues to adjust to this new reality and find its place in a rapidly changing world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.